Hey guys, tonight we are going to drift back in time to a place that was, for one long, hot summer, the absolute worst-smelling city on Earth, London, in the year 1858. Picture yourself there, standing on the banks of the River Thames. It's not the grey-green, relatively tame river you might see on a postcard today. Instead, it's a thick, brown, syrupy soup, and the air is an experience all its own. Honestly, given the state of 19th century medicine and the sheer weaponized power of the stench we're about to explore, you probably wouldn't survive a week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always nice to know you're out there. Go ahead and post your city and what time it is for you in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's begin not with a date or a person, but with a feeling. It's the feeling of a warm day turning truly uncomfortably hot. It's early June 1858. You're in the largest, wealthiest, most powerful city in the world. But as the sun climbs higher each day, it isn't the heat that you notice first. It's the smell. It's a quiet, creeping sort of thing at the beginning of the month. You've lived in London your whole life, so you're used to a certain baseline aroma. A complex bouquet of coal smoke, horse manure, unwashed bodies, and whatever mystery stew is simmering in the pub down the lane. You're conditioned to it. But this is different. This is a new, ambitious scent that seems to have plans for the whole city. You try to place it. It's a damp, heavy smell, an earthy, rotten vegetable kind of smell, but with a sour chemical undertone that catches in the back of your throat. You step out of your small rented room for a morning stroll, hopey, for a bit of fresh air. A classic comedian you are. The air is anything but fresh. It hangs, thick and still. The usual morning breeze that might drift up from the Thames seems to have given up, defeated. As you walk, you see others scrunching their noses. A woman across the street presses a small lace handkerchief to her face. A gentleman hurries past, his silver-topped cane clicking on the cobbles, and you catch a whiff of lavender water from him, a desperate floral defense against the encroaching funk. Everyone can sense it. A low-grade, city-wide anxiety is beginning to simmer, as if everyone is collectively realizing they left something terrible in the back of the refrigerator for far too long. The source, of course, is the grand old river itself, Father Thames. For centuries, poets have written about it, artists have painted it, and kings have sailed upon it. But now it's dying, and it's not dying quietly. As the temperature climbs into the 80s and then the 90s Fahrenheit, unusually hot for a London summer, the river begins to cook. The 2 million tons of waste that Londoners have been cheerfully flushing and dumping into it for decades is now baking under the relentless sun. The water level is low from the lack of rain, so the banks of the river reveal vast, muddy flats of glistening black filth which bubble and steam in the heat. You decide, against your better judgment, to get a closer look. From the perceived safety of a bridge, you peer down. The surface of the water isn't really water. It's an opaque, greasy film, rainbowed with industrial runoff and bobbing with things you'd rather not identify. You see the bloated bodies of rats, cats, and even a dog, drifting slowly in the sluggish current. Scraps of food, rags, and dark, unnameable clumps move with the tide. Historians still argue whether the smell itself was a direct cause of illness, or if it was merely the psychological trigger that finally spurred action against the waterborne diseases they didn't fully understand. But standing on this imaginary bridge, you don't care about academic debates. You just know with a deep, primal certainty that breathing this air cannot possibly be good for you. The Victorians had a particular fondness for euphemism, but even they struggled to describe this. They called it a miasma, a noxious vapour, an unwholesome effluvium. But mostly, as the days wore on, they just called it the Great Stink, and it was only just beginning. You pull your collar up over your nose, a useless gesture, and turn away from the river, but you can't escape. The smell is already everywhere. It's seeping into the brickwork of the buildings. It clings to your clothes and hair. It's the first thing you smell when you wake up, and the last thing you taste before you fall into a troubled, shallow sleep. London, the vibrant heart of an empire, is slowly suffocating in its own success. And the stage is now perfectly set for a summer of legendary misery. You turn your back on the monstrous river, but the relief is fleeting. The smell isn't just coming from the Thames, it's radiating from the very ground beneath your feet. To understand why London has become this giant, open-air potpourri of horrors, you have to look down, below the cobblestones, below the floorboards of the very house you're standing in. You see, long before the river became the city's toilet, every single building was designed to have its own private miniature lagoon of human waste. They were called cesspits, or cesspools, and they are the secret heart of this stinking metropolis. Imagine the house you live in. Now imagine that in your basement, or perhaps just under your back garden, there is a large brick-lined pit. It could be 10 feet deep, 20 feet deep, sometimes even deeper. Every time anyone in your building uses the privy, or what you might generously call a toilet, it all goes into this pit. There are no pipes leading away. There is no magical flushing mechanism that whisks it to a distant, unseen treatment plant. It just collects, day after day, year after year. Historians still debate the true number of cesspits in London by 1858, with estimates ranging wildly from 200,000 to 500,000, but it's agreed that virtually every single building was sitting on its own private mountain of filth. When you hear someone talk about a garden-level apartment in Victorian London, you should probably ask for a few more details before signing the lease. Now, these pits weren't supposed to be infinite. They were designed to be emptied. This brings us to one of the most uniquely unpleasant, yet absolutely essential professions of the era, the night soil men. They were also known by the older, more pastoral-sounding name of gong farmers. Don't let the charming title fool you. Their job was anything but. Working only under the cover of darkness, to spare the public the sight and, more importantly, the intensified smell of their work, these teams of men would arrive at a house with a cart, shovels, and large wooden tubs. Their task was to climb down into the family cesspit and manually shovel out its contents, a task that could take an entire night. You're trying to sleep, but you're woken by a scraping sound from the street below. You peek through your curtains. In the faint gaslight, you see them, a small team of shadows, working with quiet, grim efficiency. One man holds a lantern, its yellow light casting long, dancing shadows. Two others have prized open a heavy flagstone in the alleyway, revealing a dark, square opening. The smell that erupts from it, a concentrated, ancient odour of decay, is so powerful it makes the general city stink seem like a pleasant sea breeze. One of the men, often a small boy or a slightly built apprentice, is lowered down into the pit. His job is to fill bucket after bucket, which are then hoisted up and dumped into the waiting cart. It's back-breaking, nauseating, and incredibly dangerous work. The pits were often structurally unsound and collapses were common. More sinister were the fumes. The concentrated ammonia and methane gas could easily overcome a worker, causing them to suffocate and drown in the very substance they were meant to remove. And yet this was a functioning, if precarious, system. The night soil they collected was valuable. It was carted out of the city and sold to actual farmers as a potent fertilizer for their fields. In a strange circular way, the waste of the city helped to grow the food that would be brought back to feed it. It was a closed-loop system of sorts, a testament to Victorian thriftiness. We complain if the recycling isn't picked up on a Tuesday. These people were literally selling their refuse. But the system was breaking down. London was growing too fast. There were too many people, too many buildings, and far, far too many overflowing cesspits. The night soil men couldn't keep up. The pits would leak, seeping their contents into the surrounding soil and, crucially, into the wells from which people drew their drinking water. The ground beneath London was becoming a saturated sponge of human waste. And just as this delicate, foul-smelling balancing act was reaching its tipping point, a wonderful, modern and disastrously timed invention was beginning to appear in the homes of the wealthy, the flush toilet. It promised leanliness and convenience, but all it would do was take this localized subterranean problem and connect it directly to the city's main artery, the River Thames, turning a chronic illness into an acute, city-killing catastrophe. The problem with the system of cesspits and night soil men, as you've probably gathered, was that it was disgusting, dangerous, and utterly overwhelmed. The solution, it seemed, was technology, a miracle of modern engineering that promised to bring hygiene and civility right into your home. It was the water closet, the flushing toilet. Imagine you're a well-to-do Londoner, a merchant whose business is thriving. You've just had one installed. It's the 19th century equivalent of a smart home device, a true status symbol. The ceramic bowl is gleaming white, perhaps decorated with a delicate pattern of bluebells or roses. The polished mahogany seat is a work of art. The iron cistern high on the wall is ornate and imposing. There's no more need for that grim little privy at the end of the freezing cold garden. No more relying on the nocturnal visits of the gong farmers. All you have to do is pull a chain, and with a satisfying noisy cascade of water, whoosh, everything disappears. It's clean, it's private, it's futuristic. You feel immensely pleased with yourself and your modern, hygienic household. You have successfully banished filth from your immediate vicinity. The only question, which you probably don't spend much time thinking about, is, where did it go? For you, the user, the story ends with the flush. For the City of London, the story was just beginning. This new technology became a sensation, particularly after the Great Exhibition of 1851 in Hyde Park. There, an enterprising plumber named George Jennings installed the first public flushing lavatories. People were fascinated. For the price of a single penny, you could experience this modern marvel. Over 800,000 people queued up for the privilege. It was the talk of the town, the must-have new feature for any home that could afford it. And as more and more of these devices were installed, the sheer volume of wastewater skyrocketed. Each flush used several gallons of water, turning what was once semi-solid waste in a contained pit into a torrent of liquid slurry. Now, what to do with it all? The government, in a move that seemed sensible at the time, made a fateful decision. In 1848, the Metropolitan Commission of Sewers was formed. They looked at the overflowing, disease-ridden cesspits and the cholera outbreaks that seemed to emanate from them, and they declared that the cesspit system must end. They passed laws mandating that all new buildings must be connected to the main sewer lines, and that existing cesspits should be phased out. It sounds like progress, right? The problem was, London's sewers were never designed to carry this kind of material. They were old, crumbling Roman and medieval drains, intended to carry away rainwater, not the entire waste of a city of 2 million people. And where did every single one of these old drains ultimately lead? Straight into the River Thames. Historians debate whether this decision was a well-intentioned but ignorant public health measure or simply a case of legislators passing the problem downstream. In their minds, they were solving the immediate deadly problem of cholera-leaching pits right under people's homes. Their solution was dilution. The river was huge. Surely a little waste wouldn't harm it. It was a brilliant piece of out-of-sight, out-of-mind logic. They essentially traded thousands of small, hidden disasters for one single, monumental one. Every time someone pulled that ornate chain in their fancy new water closet, they were personally contributing to the slow, agonizing death of the river. You can Most feel the city breathing a sigh of relief. The old, foul cesspits were being sealed up. The ground beneath the houses was presumably becoming cleaner and safer. The night soilmen found themselves out of a job, a fact none of them likely mourned. Progress felt tangible, but it was an illusion. All they had done was reroute the problem. They had taken the monster that lived in the basement and released it into the city's main thoroughfare. The Thames, which had always been a working river but had maintained some semblance of a natural waterway, was about to be officially commissioned for a new role. It was to become London's one and only, enormous open-air sewer pipe. And with the hot, dry summer of 1858 approaching, that pipe was about to become spectacularly, unforgettably blocked. So, thanks to the marvel of the flushing toilet, the problem of London's waste has been efficiently relocated. You are now standing back at the edge of the river, the source of that pervasive stink from our first walk together. But now you understand the mechanics of it all. You know that with every pull of a chain in every well-to-do home, a fresh contribution is being made to this spectacle. Let's look closer at what Father Thames has actually become. Forget any romantic notions of a majestic river. The title, River, is now purely honorary. What flows sluggishly before you is a slow-motion slurry, an open sewer that happens to be inconveniently wide. The first thing you notice is the colour. It's not the muddy brown of a typical river carrying silt. It's a deep, ominous, almost blackish brown, like overbrewed tea or crude oil. When the sunlight hits it, which it does with oppressive force this summer, it doesn't sparkle. It glistens with a greasy, rainbow-hued sheen. This is the calling card of the city's burgeoning industries. Tanneries dump their toxic chromium and leftover animal fats. Soap factories release their lye and glycerin. Slaughterhouses, with a cheerful lack of ceremony, wash blood, offal and entrails directly into the nearest drain. It's an artisanal soup of urban life, and every single drop tells a story you'd rather not hear. The scenic riverside views now come with an olfactory price tag that no amount of property value can justify. And then there's the texture. The water moves with a heavy, syrupy laziness. It doesn't flow so much as it shifts and heaves, like a great beast stirring in its sleep. As the tide comes in, it doesn't bring fresh, clean water from the sea. It simply pushes the filth back upriver, churning it over and over again. The river is essentially flossing with its own garbage twice a day. As you watch, a bubble forms on the surface. It grows, wobbles, and then pops with a soft, wet sound, releasing a puff of gas that smells faintly of rotten eggs. This is hydrogen sulfide, a byproduct of the decomposition happening in the anaerobic sludge below. The entire river is fermenting. Of course, the most visible ingredients are the solid ones. Floating gracefully past you is a collection of urban detritus that would make a modern landfill blush. There are the animal carcasses we noted before, cats, dogs, rats, but also the occasional mournful shape of a sheep or pig that has fallen from a barge. There are vegetable peels from 1,000 kitchens, old boots, discarded hats, and a thick carpet of things that have been ground down into an unidentifiable, fibrous pulp. Scientists of the day, and historians since, have argued about the exact chemical composition of the river, but all agree that the sheer volume of dissolved organic matter reduced the oxygen levels to virtually zero. This meant nothing could live in it. The last salmon was seen in the Thames years ago. The river was biologically dead. Yet, in a strange way, it provided a living for some. At low tide, when the greasy water recedes, it exposes vast mudflats, and out on this foul-smelling landscape you can see hunched fig guidars. Tourists moving slowly. These are the toshas. They are scavengers, wading thigh-deep through the vile, sucking mud, sifting it for anything of value. Lost coins, scraps of metal, bits of rope, maybe a piece of jewellery that slipped from a wealthy finger. It is perhaps the single most wretched job in a city full of them. They are literally panning for gold in a river of sewage. Their only reward a few pennies and the near certainty of disease. It makes you think twice before ever complaining about having to take out the trash. This is the monster that London has created. It is a chemical and biological weapon aimed directly at itself. The city has poured its life, its waste, its industry, and its secrets into this channel. And now, under the baking sun of 1858, the channel is full. The monster is stirring. It's breathing its foul breath over everyone, rich and poor alike. And as you stand there taking it all in, you begin to understand the terror that is gripping the city. It's not just a bad smell. It feels like the air itself has become poisonous. An idea as old as medicine itself begins to feel very, very real. The idea that the smell, the miasma, is the killer. Standing there by the banks of that monstrous fermenting river, you feel a genuine sense of dread. The air is so thick with odour, you feel you could bite it. And in this moment, you understand the terror that is gripping London far better than any academic paper could explain. It wasn't just disgust, it was mortal fear. This fear had a name, a history, and the full backing of the most respected scientific minds of the day. It was called the Miasma Theory. The idea was simple, ancient, and terrifyingly logical. Disease is spread by bad smells. For you in 1858, this is not a fringe belief. It is the absolute, unquestioned truth. Germs, bacteria, viruses. The concepts are decades away from being understood, let alone accepted. To you, disease is a vapour, a poisonous exhalation from the earth, rising from rotting organic matter, be it a swamp, a garbage heap, an overflowing cesspit, or in this case, an entire river. You believe that when you inhale a foul smell, you are inhaling the disease itself. The stink is the sickness. Cholera, which has swept through London in devastating waves before, is not something you catch from a person or from contaminated water. It is a blue, deadly mist that rises from the ground and drifts invisibly through the streets, seeking its victims. Medical historians still debate why the miasma theory persisted for so long, arguing it was either the lack of powerful microscopes to see germs, or simply that the theory's core advice, to clean up filth, often produced positive results, albeit for the wrong reasons. Cleaning a dirty street might not stop the bad air, but it might remove the breeding ground for disease-carrying flies, or prevent waste from contaminating a water pump. So the theory seemed to work, just enough to keep it alive. In a way, it was like thinking a computer crashes because the room is haunted. Tidying the room to appease the ghost might accidentally stop you from spilling coffee on the keyboard, thus solving the problem. The conclusion is right, but the reasoning is pure fantasy. Living under the tyranny of miasma theory changes your entire relationship with the world. Every sensation becomes a potential threat. You walk down the street and catch a whiff of rotting cabbage from a gutter. Is that it? Is that the cholera miasma? You feel a cool, damp draft in your bedroom at night, the dreaded night air, famously more potent with pestilence. You must keep your windows shut tight, even on these suffocatingly hot nights. Doctors advise you based on this principle. Their prescriptions often amount to a change of scenery. If you are wealthy, the advice for illness is to leave the city entirely and retreat to your country estate, where the air is purer. It's perhaps the most expensive and elaborate medical advice ever given. Have you tried not living here anymore? To protect yourself, you turn to the science of scent. You carry a pomander, a small metal ball filled with fragrant herbs, or maybe an orange studded with cloves, holding it to your nose whenever you pass a particularly pungent area. In your home, you burn juniper wood or rosemary, hoping the pleasant smoke will overpower and neutralize the deadly vapors. Gentlemen take up smoking tobacco with a new vigor, believing the acrid smoke scours the air before it enters their lungs. It was a form of aromatherapy, practiced with the highest, most desperate stakes. You are literally trying to fight a smell with a nicer smell. Now, look again at the River Thames, bubbling and steaming under the June sun. It is no longer just a disgusting inconvenience. It is the physical embodiment of all your fears. It is the miasma factory, the source of all pestilence, churning out a super plume of airborne death that is blanketing the most powerful city on earth. Every politician in the Houses of Parliament, every lawyer in the courts, every merchant in the city, and every family in their homes is breathing it in right now. They believe with every fibre of their being that this great stink is the prelude to a great death. And in the face of this invisible, airborne enemy, a brilliant doctor with a very different and very lonely idea was trying desperately to make himself heard. In the face of this all-consuming, odour-based panic, there was a man who listened to the evidence of his own eyes and his own relentless logic rather than his nose. His name was Dr. John Snow. He was a quiet, unassuming physician, an anaesthetist by trade who had even administered chloroform to Queen Victoria during childbirth. But his true passion was epidemiology, the study of how diseases spread, and for years he had been building a case for a radical, deeply unpopular idea that cholera, the great terror of the age, had absolutely nothing to do with the air. Let's step back just 4 years, to 1854. You are walking with Dr. Snow through the cramped, teeming streets of Soho. An outbreak of cholera has just exploded here, killing with terrifying speed. In the space of 10 days, over 500 people have died within a few city blocks. To everyone else, the cause is obvious. The area smells bad. There's a poorly maintained sewer, a lot of garbage. It is a classic miasma hotspot. The official medical advice is to flee, to burn purifying herbs to hold your breath. But Dr. Snow isn't smelling the air. He's talking to people. He's asking questions. And most importantly, he's making a map. It's not a very exciting map. It's a simple street plan of Soho. But on it, he makes a small black mark for every single death. He had the rather unsuperhero-like power of making meticulously boring maps that would end up saving thousands of lives. As you follow him, you watch his process. He speaks to a grieving mother and learns that her son, who lived miles away, had visited her just before getting sick. He asks what they did together. They had a glass of water. He talks to the keepers of a local workhouse, a place that is crowded and situated right in the heart of the outbreak, yet has suffered almost no deaths. Why? He discovers they have their own private well, and they don't drink the local water. The clues are piling up, and they are all wet. The black marks on his map, he notices, are not spread out evenly. They cluster thick and dark around one particular spot, a public water pump on Broad Street. Here was the smoking gun, or rather, the dripping tap. But Snow needed more. He needed to disprove the Miasma Theory directly. He found it in the local brewery. The brewery workers, right in the epicenter of the outbreak, were almost all perfectly healthy. The miasma believers were stumped. How could they be breathing the same deadly air but not getting sick? Snow found the simple answer. They were given a daily allowance of beer and rarely, if ever, drank water from the local pump. The final perfect piece of evidence came from a woman who had died of cholera far away in Hampstead, a leafy suburb miles from the foul air of Soho. It seemed to be an anomaly that fit no pattern, until Snow, with his tireless diligence, discovered that the woman had grown up in Soho. She had retained a fondness for the taste of the water from the Broad Street pump, and had a large bottle of it delivered to her home every single day. She drank the water, and she died. Epidemiologists and historians still debate the exact moment Snow had his eureka insight, whether it was a slow, dawning realization over years of study, or a sudden breakthrough during the intensity of the Broad Street outbreak. But what he did next was legendary. He took his map and his evidence to the local authorities and, with calm, unshakable logic, convinced them to take the handle off the Broad Street pump. The outbreak almost immediately subsided. He had proved his case. He had shown, with scientific certainty, that the killer was in the water. And what was his reward? He was largely ignored. The medical establishment, deeply invested in the miasma theory, patronized him. His evidence was interesting, they said, but it was probably a coincidence. The official report on the outbreak concluded that the epidemic was caused by a foul drain that happened to be near the pump, its miasma seeping into the local atmosphere. It was like trying to convince someone on the internet that they're wrong. The evidence is irrelevant in the face of a deeply held belief. So as the summer of 1858 begins and the Great Stink descends, Dr. John Snow is still a voice in the wilderness. His elegant proof is filed away, and the city continues to stare at the sky, sniffing the air for danger, while the real poison flows silently, invisibly, right beneath their feet. Dr. Snow's ignored theories hang in the air, as unnoticed as the germs he so firmly believed in. The city, meanwhile, continues to operate on its old fears, its old assumptions. And now, a new and powerful force enters the story, a character in its own right that will take all the existing problems and amplify them to an unbearable degree. That character is the weather. The story of the Great Stink is, above all else, the story of a heatwave. It begins in late May and gathers strength as June arrives. You wake up one morning and the air in your room already feels warm and close. There is no morning chill. The sky, instead of the usual variable London grey, is a pale, washed-out blue, hazy with dust and smoke. As you get dressed, you realise the foolishness of your wardrobe. You pull on your layers of cotton and wool, perhaps a tightly laced corset or a stiff collar. It's the uniform of a respectable citizen of a temperate climate, but it feels like you're putting on a suit of armour to go for a swim. Making the choice to wear multiple layers of wool in this heat is cert. Ainly a bold one, even for a Victorian. You step outside, and the heat hits you, not like a gentle warmth, but like a physical weight. There is no breeze, none. The air is perfectly, unnervingly still. The usual sounds of the city seem muffled and distant, as if the heat itself is absorbing them. The normal, energetic clatter of iron-shod wheels on cobblestones is replaced by a duller, slightly sticky sound, as the tar used to seal the stones has softened into a black gum. You watch a heavy cart laden with goods struggle past, its driver flushed and sweating, and you can see the wheels sink just slightly into the tacky surface of the road. Meteorological historians still discuss the precise cause of the 1858 heatwave, debating whether it was part of a larger North Atlantic climate pattern or simply a freak anomaly, a once-in-a-century event. But for you, living through it, the cause is irrelevant. The result is all that matters. Day after day, the sun beats down from a cloudless sky. The temperature climbs into the 30s Celsius, the 90s Fahrenheit. For a city and a population famously unequipped for any weather that isn't cool and damp, this is an alien ordeal. In the city's small parks, the grass is not green but a brittle, yellow-brown. The earth is dry and cracked. The idea of a gentle afternoon of sunbathing is replaced by the grim reality of dust bathing. Inside, there is no escape. The brick and stone of the buildings absorb the heat all day and radiate it back all night. You press your hand against a wall, even hours after sunset, and it feels warm to the touch. In the larder, the butter has turned to a golden puddle. Milk sours in hours. Sleep becomes a shallow, fitful thing, punctuated by the relentless buzz of flies who are enjoying the weather far more than the humans. And all the while, this relentless, rainless heat is working its terrible magic on the River Thames. It is the oven, and the river is the baking dish. The low water levels, caused by the lack of rain, expose ever wider banks of thick, black, organic sludge to the direct glare of the sun. The process of decomposition, the fermentation we spoke of, accelerates wildly. The gentle bubbling you might have noticed before is now a constant, vigorous fizzing, as if the whole river is a glass of some monstrous, flat champagne. The volume of hydrogen sulfide and methane gas being released is immense. The faint rotten egg smell is now a permanent, choking miasma. The heat is taking the foul recipe created by the city's new toilets and old industries, and it is cooking it into a weapon. The Great Stink is about to go from being a chronic, disgusting problem to an acute, history-making crisis that will knock on the doors of the most powerful people in the British Empire. You are now floating, like an invisible spectator, into one of the grandest buildings in the entire British Empire, the newly rebuilt Palace of Westminster. This is the seat of power, the home of the Houses of Parliament. Its soaring Gothic spires and intricate carvings are a testament to Victorian ambition and confidence. It is a building designed to project majesty and permanence. But as you drift through its long, ornate corridors in mid-June of 1858, you notice that this majesty is being decisively undermined by a smell. The Great Stink has come for the government. The building is situated directly on the north bank of the Thames. This was considered a feature, not a bug. The grand terrace at the back was meant for thoughtful riverside strolls, for political rivals to find common ground while gazing at the gentle flow of the river. Now, that terrace is a chemical warfare zone, the windows facing the river. Woo. It should offer picturesque views, have become portals for a relentless olfactory assault. The usual hot air and droning speeches that fill these chambers have been replaced by an atmosphere that is far more potent and arguably just as toxic. You find your way into the chamber of the House of Commons. The scene is one of quiet, dignified chaos. Men in dark, heavy suits are slumped on the green leather benches. Some are fanning themselves languidly with bundles of papers. Many are holding handkerchiefs to their faces, not out of emotional distress, but as a literal filter against the air. The Prime Minister, Lord Derby, is at the dispatch box trying to address the nation's business, but his words are punctuated by the unmistakable sounds of barely suppressed coughs and retching from the back benches. An MP, mid-sentence in a debate about foreign policy, might suddenly turn a pale shade of green, mutter an apology, and flee the chamber. You can't help but think that a similar mechanism for cutting speeches short might be a welcome innovation in modern politics. The government, in its wisdom, decides to fight back. Their chosen weapon? Chloride of lime. It's a bleaching powder with a sharp, acrid smell, believed to be a powerful disinfectant against miasmatic vapours. On the orders of the Speaker of the House, the building's staff are instructed to hang vast sheets and curtains soaked in the stuff over the windows. The idea is to create a chemical barrier. The result, however, is a disaster. Instead of neutralising the stench of the river, the sharp chemical smell of the lime merely mingles with it, creating a new, hybrid super stench. It's a perfume of decay and chlorine, a smell that speaks of both industrial pollution and biological horror. It was like trying to put out a house fire with a scented candle. Historians debate whether the MP's sudden urgency was driven by a genuine fear for their health based on Miasma Theory, or by the sheer, unignorable political embarrassment of the government being physically besieged by its own filth. In truth, it was likely both. These men firmly believed the air could kill them. They were breathing in what they considered to be aerosolized cholera. At the same time, the humiliation was immense. The government of the world's greatest empire was unable to even sit in its own legislative chamber. The situation became so dire that serious proposals were floated to abandon London altogether. There was talk of moving the entire Parliament to Oxford, or perhaps to St Albans, anywhere to escape the suffocating grip of their own river. Imagine the scene in the Parliamentary Library. It's supposed to be a sanctuary of quiet contemplation. Instead, the librarians have been ordered to write letters to the new chief engineer, a man named Joseph Bazalgette, practically begging him for a solution. They can't work, they complain. The stink is giving them headaches and nausea. It's seeping into the ancient books. A foul footnote for future generations. For the first time, the problem is not happening to the poor in some distant, smelly borough. It's not an abstract issue to be dealt with by a committee someday. The problem is literally in their faces, making their eyes water and turning their stomachs. The great stink had finally done what decades of reports and warnings could not. It had gotten personal. It's one thing to suffer the stink from within the carved stone and polished wood of Parliament, a temporary and shocking invasion of your privileged world. It's quite another to live your entire life marinating in it. So let's leave the panicked politicians with their lime-soaked curtains and take a short walk across Westminster Bridge. As you cross the river, the grand Gothic spires behind you. The air somehow grows thicker, the smell more complex. You are now entering the borough of Lambeth, and here the great stink is not a crisis, it's just the weather. The concept of riverfront property has a very different meaning here. There are no grand terraces. Instead, you see a chaotic jumble of wooden houses, many built on rickety stilts that sink directly into the foul-smelling mud of the riverbank. They lean against each other for support, their timbers stained dark with perpetual damp. At high tide, the greasy water laps just feet below their floorboards, and sometimes a little higher. The walls seep a permanent chilling dampness, and the floorboards are never truly dry. This isn't a temporary inconvenience. It's the very foundation of home. You walk through the narrow, unpaved lanes. The air, already thick with the river's unique perfume, is layered with other scents. The sharp tang of coal smoke from 1,000 chimneys, the smell of boiling cabbage and cheap gin drifting from open doorways, and the pervasive, underlying scent of human life crowded too closely together. Social historians debate whether these riverside communities developed a kind of grim immunity to the conditions, or if they simply suffered from chronically poor health that was accepted as the normal state of being for the urban poor. Looking at the pale faces and hearing the persistent coughs around you, you suspect it's the latter. Life here is lived in public. Women sit on their doorsteps, mending clothes or delousing their children's hair, their conversations shouted over the noise of the nearby docks. Men, covered in grime, trudge home from their jobs at the tanneries, the potteries, the breweries and the wharves, all the industries that contribute their own special ingredients to the river's toxic soup. Their work clothes are stiff with filth, and they carry the smell of their trade with them. The idea of changing into clean evening wear is a fantasy from another universe. Down at the water's edge, you see the children. While the wealthy might be sent to the country to escape the miasma, these children use the riverbank as their playground. At low tide, they become mudlarks. You watch a small group of them, barefoot and dressed in rags, scampering across the exposed, glistening mudflats. They are not playing a game. They are working. They poke and sift through the foul sludge with their bare hands, searching for anything they can sell. Scraps of coal that have fallen from barges, bits of old rope, copper nails, maybe a dropped coin if they are exceptionally lucky. Their toys are bits of coloured glass worn smooth by the river, or the bleached bones of a long-dead animal. It's a very organic, locally sourced play experience provided entirely by the city's refuse. You pass a small makeshift market. A man is selling fish from a wooden cart. He calls out, praising their freshness, but the fish look tired and glassy-eyed. They were likely caught miles downriver, where the water was marginally cleaner, and have spent a day or two making their journey to this stall. Buying seafood from a man standing a few feet from a river you know to be a dead, open sewer feels like a particularly brave act of faith. For the people of Lambeth, Southwark and the other impoverished riverside districts, this is the whole world. The MPs in Parliament could debate fleeing to Oxford. For a mudlark or a docker's wife, there is nowhere else to go. This is their air, their water, their home. And as the sun continues to beat down, they simply endure, their quiet, unseen suffering a world away from the loud, panicked complaints of the men across the river who were finally being forced to smell their own mess. The cries of the politicians and the silent suffering of the mudlarks represent two ends of a spectrum of misery. But for anything to change, the problem needed more than just emotion. It needed a voice of unimpeachable authority, a voice of science that could cut through the panic and the politics. That voice belonged to Michael Faraday, one of the most brilliant and respected scientists in the world. And to make his point, he didn't need a laboratory or complex equipment. He just needed a steamboat and a few of his own calling cards. Let's imagine you are taking a journey on a Thames steamboat. We'll slip back in time just a little, to a hot day a couple of years before the Great Stink, as the events of that time laid the crucial groundwork for 1858. The experience of a river cruise is not quite the pleasant tourist activity it is today. As the paddle wheels churn the water, they kick up a spray that smells so foul, passengers instinctively flinch and turn away. The water they churn is the colour of a milky coffee, thick and clouded with things you'd rather not inspect too closely. Among the passengers is a man with kind, intelligent eyes, watching the river not with disgust, but with intense, scientific curiosity. This is Faraday. He is commuting between London Bridge and Hungerford Bridge, and he decides to conduct a simple experiment. You watch as he reaches into his waistcoat pocket and pulls out a crisp, white calling card. He tears it into pieces. Then, leaning over the railing, he drops one of the white scraps into the river. It lands on the surface and vanishes. Not slowly sinks, not drifts away, but simply disappears instantly into the opaque, brown fluid. He drops another. Poof! Gone. He notes that the card becomes invisible the moment it is submerged less than an inch beneath the surface. He is, in effect, measuring the river's opacity, and the results are appalling. It's the 19th century version of a product review, and the product is an absolute failure. He continues his experiment for the entire journey. At every bridge, he drops more pieces of card, observing the results. They are always the same. The river is so thick with filth, so utterly saturated with suspended solid waste, that it has lost all transparency. He also dips some of the cards into the water and lets them dry, noting that they become coated with a slimy brown film and emit a highly offensive odour. For Faraday, this isn't just an unpleasant boat ride, it's an empirical disaster. He is observing a natural system that has been pushed past its breaking point into a state of chemical chaos. When he gets home, he doesn't just complain to his friends. He sits down and writes a letter to the Times, the most influential newspaper in the country. He uses his clear, precise, scientific language to describe what he has seen. He calls the river a fermenting sewer. He describes the bubbling of the gases, which he correctly identifies as a sign of putrefaction. He He ends his letter with a stark warning. If we neglect this subject, we cannot expect to do so with impunity, nor ought we to be surprised if, ere many years are over, a hot season give us sad proof of the folly of our carelessness. The letter, published in July of 1855, causes a sensation. In an age before instant media, a powerful letter to the editor from a man like Faraday was a major event. It was read by everyone who mattered: politicians, businessmen, doctors, engineers. And when the truly hot season he predicted arrived with a vengeance in 1858, his words seemed prophetic. His letter was reprinted and discussed with renewed urgency. Historians debate the exact impact of Faraday's letter, with some seeing it as the primary catalyst that shamed the government into action, while others view it as just one piece of a broader public outcry. But there is no doubt it played a crucial role. He had held up a mirror to the city, and the reflection was disgusting. He didn't scream or panic. He simply dropped a white card into the water, and in doing so showed London the true colour of its own filth. Michael Faraday's letter gave the city a scientific vocabulary for its disgust, but the daily reality needed no explanation. The government in Westminster wasn't the only pillar of the establishment to find itself under siege. Just a short walk from the Houses of Parliament, another fundamental institution of the state was choking on the same foul air. The law itself was finding it difficult to breathe. Let's drift now into the sombre wood-panelled courtrooms of Westminster Hall and the Guildhall, where justice was supposed to be blind, but was finding it impossible to be nose-blind. You find yourself in a courtroom. The air is thick, not just with legal precedent and hushed tension, but with the now familiar stench of the river, which seems to have a particular affinity for old buildings full of paper and leather. The smell seeps into the thick velvet curtains, the leather-bound law books, the horsehair wigs of the barristers, and the heavy woolen robes of the judge, who sits elevated above the proceedings looking flushed and deeply unhappy. Those magnificent wigs, designed to bestow an aura of wisdom and authority, have unfortunately proven to be excellent scent absorbers, making the judge's personal experience particularly potent. A barrister, a young man trying to make his name, is on his feet. He is arguing a complex point of contract law, his voice droning on in the sleepy afternoon heat, but his eloquent legal arguments are being undermined by his own body. Sweat beads on his forehead and trickles down from under his wig. He keeps dabbing at his upper lip with a handkerchief, and you can see him swallowing hard, fighting a rising wave of nausea. He might be citing a case from the 18th century, but his whole being is trapped in the putrid present of 1858. The very concept of the stench of injustice has become startlingly literal. The function of the court is grinding to a halt. Witnesses brought in to testify are so overwhelmed by the atmosphere that they can barely speak. A judge might threaten someone with contempt of court for their silence, only to see the poor soul turn green and gesture helplessly at their throat. How can you give a clear, sworn testimony when every breath is an ordeal? You can imagine a witness being tempted to confess to just about anything, simply to be allowed to leave the room and get a breath of what passed for fresh air outside. Legal historians have debated whether any verdicts were directly influenced by the foul conditions, suggesting that the desire of juries and judges to simply conclude a case and escape the courtroom might have led to hastier judgments than usual. Did the stink short-circuit justice? It's impossible to know for sure, but you can feel the pressure in the room. The normal, slow, deliberate pace of the law is warped by a universal, unspoken urgency. The need to get on with it is no longer about efficiency, but about survival. The flies, fat and lazy from feasting on the riverbanks, buzz around the room, settling on wigs and legal documents with infuriating impunity. The situation becomes so intolerable that the judges, these powerful figures who command the respect and fear of the public, are forced to admit defeat. Official records show them complaining that the noxious effluvia from the river is making it impossible to continue. They send desperate pleas for something, anything, to be done. There is serious talk of simply adjourning the courts, of putting the entire legal system of the capital on hold until the smell subsides. The government may be paralysed, but now the law is being suffocated too. The very mechanisms that hold the city together are failing, one by one. The Great Stink is no longer just a public health issue or an EAM. Embarrassment. It's a direct threat to the continuation of civic society. And with the scientists, the politicians, and now the lawyers all reeling, another powerful force was about to enter the fray and give the stink a personality all its own. The scientists had provided the data, and the politicians and lawyers had provided the drama, but the Great Stink still needed a face. The problem with an enemy like a smell, a miasma, is that it's invisible, shapeless. You can't rally people against a vapour. To truly galvanise the public, the stink needed to become a personality. It needed to be transformed from a scent into a monster. This vital task fell to the satirists and cartoonists of the day, most famously those working for a witty, subversive and hugely popular magazine called Punch. You are standing in front of a news vendor's window, the oppressive summer heat still hanging in the air. You've read Faraday's letter in the Times, you've heard the rumours of the government fleeing Westminster, but now you see it. Pinned up for all to see is the latest issue of Punch, and its main cartoon stops you in your tracks. It's a powerful black and white drawing, the 19th century equivalent of a viral meme, and it captures the city's mood perfectly. This is how public opinion was shaped in an age before photographs in newspapers, before television, before the internet. A single brilliantly drawn cartoon could be more powerful than 1,000 angry editorials. Let's look at one of the most famous images from that summer, drawn by John Leech. It's titled The Silent Highwayman. In the drawing, the skeletal figure of Death, cloaked and grinning, is rowing a boat on the Thames. But here, Death isn't just a generic symbol of mortality. His bony hand is reaching for the oar of a boatman, symbolizing the river itself. The caption reads, "Your money or your life." It's a bitter, powerful joke. The government was refusing to spend the money to clean the river, and as a result, the river itself, personified by Death, was threatening the lives of the city's inhabitants. The message was simple, brutal, and effective. This wasn't a natural disaster, it was a crisis caused by political inaction and greed. Another iconic cartoon from that summer depicts Father Thames introducing his offspring. Here, a filthy, bearded, and decrepit Father Thames, looking more like a monster from a nightmare than a noble river god, is presenting his children to a horrified Britannia, the symbol of the nation. And who are his children? They are ugly, monstrous little creatures labelled diphtheria, scrofula, and cholera. The drawing makes the connection explicit, turning Dr. Snow's theories and the public's miasmatic fears into a grotesque family portrait. The river is literally giving birth to disease. For the average Londoner seeing this, the complex science and political debates were distilled into one gut punch of an image. It was nuanced social commentary, delivered with all the subtlety of a skeleton holding a scythe. Media historians still argue about whether Punch was reflecting public opinion or actively shaping it, debating if the magazine was a mirror for the people's anger or a lamp that guided it towards specific political targets. But looking at these images, you can feel their power. They gave Londoners a common enemy to visualise and a common set of villains to blame, the penny-pinching politicians. This wasn't a new idea, of course. Decades earlier, a cartoonist named William Heath had drawn Monster Soup, commonly called Thames Water, which showed a magnified drop of river water teeming with grotesque, clawed creatures attacking a terrified woman as she drinks her tea. The fear of the water was old, but the heatwave of 1858 and the new, relentless focus of Punch made it impossible to ignore. In the end, politicians are often more afraid of being publicly ridiculed than they are of a crisis itself. Being portrayed week after week as foolish, incompetent, and directly responsible for a city-sized monster was a powerful motivator. The pressure was now coming from every direction. Their own noses were telling them there was a problem, the scientists were telling them there was a problem, and now the cartoonists were telling the entire country that they were the problem. The government was cornered. Something had to be done, and soon a hero, an unlikely, unglamorous engineering hero, would step out of the wings. In a story like this, full of chaos and panic, you start to look for a hero, a charismatic politician to give a stirring speech, a noble doctor to make a dramatic discovery, maybe a brave activist to lead a public charge. But the man who would save London from itself was none of those things. The city didn't need a hero in a cape. It needed a man with a slide rule, a deep understanding of gravity, and immaculate handwriting. His name was Joseph Bazalgette. Let's leave the noisy world of cartoonists and panicked politicians and enter a quiet, orderly office at the headquarters of the Metropolitan Board of Works. Here, amidst the citywide crisis, is a man who is not panicking. He is a man of about 50, with a commanding forehead and a calm, focused gaze. His name, Bazalgette, is unusual, a legacy of his French Huguenot ancestors who fled persecution to England. He is an engineer, and for him, the Great Stink is not a surprising horror. It is an entirely predictable outcome of a problem he has been working to solve for years. While Parliament was debating and the press was satirising, Bazalgette was drawing. You can picture him there, surrounded by vast, rolled-up sheets of paper. These are not wild sketches, they are meticulously detailed plans, covered in precise lines, elegant script, and complex calculations. For 6 years, he and his small team had been surveying, planning, and refining a solution to London's sewage problem. They had drafted and redrafted proposals, only to see them rejected, underfunded, or endlessly debated by committees who couldn't grasp the scale of the issue. The government, in its infinite wisdom, literally had the answer to its prayers sitting in a desk drawer, but had been too busy arguing to bother funding it. Bazalgette was a product of the great engineering boom of the age. He had cut his teeth working on the railways, learning the vital arts of managing huge construction projects, moving mountains of earth, and most importantly, calculating gradients. He understood how to make things flow downhill. This sounds simple, almost childishly so, but when your task is to drain a flat, sprawling city of 2 million people, getting the gradients right is an act of genius. It was the unglamorous, essential work of saving a city, while others were looking at the stink as a problem of chemistry. Our morality, Bazalgette saw it as a problem of physics. The waste was in the wrong place. His job was to move it somewhere else. Historians and biographers debate the core of Bazalgette's genius. Was it his innovative engineering vision, or his incredible political stamina and bureaucratic skill in navigating years of opposition to get his plans approved? He wasn't a showman. By all accounts, he was a quiet, formal, and deeply methodical man. He didn't write fiery letters to the press or give passionate speeches. He made his arguments with numbers, with maps, with page after page of evidence and calculations that demonstrated the elegant efficiency of his solution. He was the calm, rational centre in a storm of miasmatic madness. As the great stink reached its peak in that hot summer, you can imagine Bazalgette feeling a sense of grim vindication. He knew this was coming. He had warned them. Now, as the city ground to a halt and the powerful began to gag, the plans that had been gathering dust on his shelves suddenly became the most important documents in the country. The politicians who had dismissed his earlier proposals as too expensive or too ambitious were about to come calling. The hero had been there all along, not riding to the rescue, but sitting patiently at his desk, waiting for the world to finally catch up with the solution he'd already engineered. The time for talk was over. It was time to look at the maps. Joseph Bazalgette had the plan. It was elegant, it was detailed, and it was ready. But a plan is just a drawing on a piece of paper until someone provides the money. And so, we must leave the calm, rational world of the engineer's office and return to the hot, stinking, and deeply irrational chamber of the House of Commons. The hero has presented his solution. Now the dragons, in this case the Lords of the Treasury and the penny-pinching backbench, must be slain. The final battle would not be fought with shovels and bricks, but with ledgers and rhetoric. You are back in the public gallery, looking down upon the exhausted and irritable members of Parliament. The smell has not improved. If anything, the ongoing heat has made it worse. Yet, even in the face of this overwhelming sensory evidence, the government's first instinct upon hearing the price tag for Bazalgette's grand sewer scheme was to gasp, clutch its collective pearls, and faint elegantly upon the nearest chaise lounge. The figure being proposed was £3 million. Let's just let that number settle for a moment. £3 million in 1858 is a staggering, almost incomprehensible sum of money. It would be billions in today's currency. It was more than the government spent on many of its departments for an entire year. The man tasked with finding this money was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, a famously dapper and novelist-turned-politician named Benjamin Disraeli. You can see him in his seat, looking deeply pained, as if the smell of the river was a personal insult to his perfectly tailored suit and his national budget. The debate begins. It's a masterclass in political absurdity. One MP, a staunch fiscal conservative from a pleasant, airy county far from London, stands up to argue passionately against this profligate expenditure. He speaks of the burden on the taxpayer, the danger of setting a precedent for government overreach, and the importance of fiscal discipline, all while visibly sweating and holding a scented handkerchief to his nose. It's a beautiful moment of cognitive dissonance, watching a man argue against a lifeboat while his own ship is sinking. The arguments against the plan are varied. Why should a resident of leafy, elevated Hampstead, who can barely smell the river, pay the same tax as a poor factory worker in Bermondsey, whose house is practically submerged in the filth? This was the proposed funding mechanism, a 3-penny rate levied on every household in London for the next 40 years. It was a new tax, and no politician in history has ever enjoyed proposing a new tax, even one designed to prevent them from literally suffocating. There were shouts, jeers, and angry waves of paper. It's truly shocking, I know, to imagine politicians being reluctant to spend a vast sum of public money. Economic historians debate whether the government's ultimate decision to fund the project was a pioneering act of Keynesian-style public investment or simply a panicked reaction, where the fear of revolution or total societal collapse finally outweighed their fiscal conservatism. In the chamber, the debate feels far less academic. It's a raw clash of ideology and instinct, the instinct to save money versus the instinct to breathe. For several long, hot, smelly weeks, the outcome was genuinely in doubt. The government proposed alternate plans. Maybe they could just build a partial system. Maybe they could just extend the existing sewer pipes a little further downriver. They tried every possible cheap short-term fix their accountants could imagine. But the stink was relentless. It was the most effective lobbyist in history. It didn't make appointments. It simply wafted into every committee room, a silent, putrid argument against further delay. Every time an MP stood up to argue for a cheaper, less effective solution, the river itself seemed to offer a rebuttal in the form of a particularly noxious wave of stench from the open windows. The pressure from the press, with Punch magazine's cartoons mocking them weekly, was immense. The pressure from the public was growing, and the pressure on their own gag reflexes was becoming unbearable. Disraeli and the rest of the government were realizing that the cost of doing nothing, the collapse of commerce, the flight from the city, a potential cholera epidemic, was far higher than £3 million. The debate was about to end. The politicians, gasping and backed into a corner, were on the verge of surrender. The money, it seemed, would be found. But what exactly was this £3 million plan that had been sitting on Joseph Bazalgette's desk? It wasn't just a bigger pipe or a deeper ditch. It was a vision of such elegant simplicity and staggering ambition that it remains one of the greatest feats of civil engineering in history. Let's unroll those blueprints and trace the quiet genius of the grand interception. Imagine you are in Bazalgette's office. The hubbub of Parliament faded to a distant murmur. Before you is a huge map of London, crisscrossed with a confusing web of blue lines. These are the existing sewers and drains, over 100 of them, all doing the same stupid thing, dumping their contents directly into the Thames at the nearest possible point. Bazalgette's solution was not to replace this chaotic system, but to outsmart it. His idea was based on one beautiful, simple word: interception. He takes a pencil and draws a long, thick line on the map, running parallel to the river on the north side, then another below it, and a third. He does the same on the south side. These are his new main arteries, the great intercepting sewers. They would be vast underground rivers, brick-lined tunnels dug deep beneath the city. Their job was to run perpendicular to the existing sewers and, as the name suggests, intercept their flow. Instead of 100 drains polluting the river along its central London stretch, the waste would now be captured, diverted into these new superhighways, and carried away. It was, at its heart, a very glamorous plumbing job, just for a city of 2 million people. The true genius, however, lay in the execution. How do you get millions of gallons of sewage to travel for miles without a single pump? The answer is the same one nature has used forever: gravity. And Bazalgette and his team had meticulously calculated a perfect, gentle downward slope for the entire system. The gradient was just 2 feet for every mile. It was a slope so gentle you would never notice it if you were walking on it, but it was just enough to keep the massive flow of water constantly, reliably moving eastward, away from the city. The principle was as simple as making water run downhill, but applying it across a vast, flat, and already built-up city was an act of pure mathematical artistry, and the tunnels themselves were a masterpiece of design. When you imagine a sewer pipe, you probably think of a simple circle. Bazalgette knew a circular pipe had a flaw. During periods of low flow on dry days, the water would be shallow and slow, allowing heavy sediment to sink and clog the system. So he designed his tunnels to be egg-shaped or ovoid with the narrower end at the bottom. This brilliant, simple tweak meant that even a small amount of water would create a deeper, faster-flowing channel at the narrow base, scouring the pipe clean. Then during a rainstorm, the wider upper part of the egg shape could handle the massive surge in volume. It was a self-cleaning sewer, and for an engineer, there is perhaps no more romantic concept than that. Bazalgette was also a man who planned for the future. When his political masters and financial overseers questioned the enormous size of the pipes he was proposing, he famously held his ground. Civil engineers still marvel at his audacity, debating whether his decision to essentially double the required diameter was an act of incredible foresight or a cautious over-engineering typical of the era. His own justification was simple: we're only going to do this once, and there's always the unforeseen. He calculated the needs of the current population and then designed a system that could handle twice that number. He was not just solving the great stink of 1858, he was building a system that would serve London for a century to come. So this was the plan, not just a sewer, but a hidden parallel river system powered by gravity, designed to clean itself, and built for a future no one could yet imagine. It was orderly, logical, and brilliant. All that was needed was a final, official rubber stamp of approval. The plan was on the table, a masterpiece of quiet logic. The money had been argued over, a torrent of anxious rhetoric. But the river didn't care about plans or budgets. It just kept cooking under the relentless July sun, and the stink, the great inescapable democratic stink, kept wafting into the halls of power. The time for debate was over. The time for a decision had been forced upon them. What happened next was a strange and wonderful spectacle, a government acting with speed and purpose. You are back in the House of Commons for the final act of this political drama. It's late July, 1858. The air in the chamber is thick enough to chew. The collective mood is one of utter desperation. All the arguments about fiscal responsibility and the unfairness of the tax have evaporated in the heat. The opposition to the bill has melted away, not by persuasive argument, but by the sheer, brute force of nausea. The government, led by Lord Derby and his Chancellor, Benjamin Disraeli, tables the bill. It has a deeply, wonderfully boring title, the Metropolis Local Management Amendment Act. It is perhaps the most boring name ever given to a piece of legislation passed in a fit of pure existential panic. The proceedings are a blur. Normally, a bill of this magnitude, committing such a vast sum of money, would be debated for months. It would be picked apart in committees, amended, sent back, redrafted, and subjected to endless scrutiny. But there is no time. The government is, quite literally, holding its nose and getting it done. The bill is rushed through its various readings in just 18 days. 18 days to approve a project that would define the city for the next century. Modern governments might want to take note. If you really want to pass legislation quickly, a well-placed, soul-crushing stench might be more effective than any party whip. You watch as the clerk reads the key clauses. The Metropolitan Board of Works is hereby granted the sum of £3 million. They are to commence construction of the intercepting sewer system immediately. And then, a fascinating little detail. The bill includes a clause that protects the board from any legal action taken against it for any nuisance caused by the construction. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card, a recognition that building this thing was going to be messy, loud and disruptive. Parliament was so desperate for a solution that they gave Joseph Bazalgette not only a blank cheque but also complete immunity. Just build it, the Act seems to scream. We don't care how, just make the smell stop. Political historians debate whether this rapid legislative action was a triumph of pragmatic governance in a crisis, or a worrying example of how panic can override normal democratic scrutiny and due process. But for the MPs in the room, it was neither. It was a lifeline. When the final vote is called, there is no grand swelling oration. There is just a quiet, grim determination. The speaker calls for the ayes and the noes. Hands are raised all across the chamber, many of them still clutching the damp, scented handkerchiefs that had become the essential accessory of that summer. It is passed, not with a roar of acclamation, but with a weary, unified sigh of relief. A strange quiet settles over the room. For the first time in weeks, the politicians had found something they could all agree on, that this was unbearable. The act of desperation was now the law of the land. The news would have reached Joseph Bazalgette in his quiet office. After years of careful planning and patient frustration, he finally had what he needed. The authority, the money, and the full, desperate backing of a humbled government. The talking was officially over. Now the digging could begin. A new army was about to be mobilised in London, not one of soldiers with rifles, but of labourers with shovels and pickaxes. The ink on the Metropolis Local Management Amendment Act was barely dry before the sound of talking in Parliament was replaced by a new, more decisive sound on the streets of London. It was the rhythmic thud of the pickaxe, the scrape of the shovel, and the rumble of the wheelbarrow. Joseph Bazalgette had his mission, he had his money, and he had his plans. Now he needed an army not of soldiers but of diggers, an army to wage war on the London clay. These were the men known simply as navvies. Let's go to one of the first work sites. A long, deep trench is being cut into the earth like a raw wound on the city's skin, and in this trench you see them. The navvies are a breed apart. They are powerfully built men, their arms and shoulders thick with muscle from a lifetime of hard physical labour. Dressed in simple, durable corduroy trousers, thick flannel shirts, and heavy boots, they work with a focused, disciplined energy that is mesmerising to watch. There are no steam shovels or excavators here. This is the most aggressive form of gardening in history, and every single ton of earth will be moved by hand. The name navvy came from the word navigator, the term for the men who had dug Britain's vast network of canals a generation earlier. Many of them were Irish, having fled famine or poverty at home, and they followed the work wherever it led. Canals, then railways, and now the Great London sewers. They were a nomadic, close-knit community, often living in temporary camps, and viewed with a mixture of awe and fear by the settled population. They were known for their prodigious strength, their thirst for beer, and their often rowdy behaviour on payday. Social historians debate the complex identity of the navvy. Were they a lawless, disruptive force on the fringes of Victorian society, or a proud, independent and highly skilled working class who were essential to the Industrial Revolution but unfairly stereotyped? Watching them work, you see not chaos but a deep, ingrained skill. A team of navvies worked in a coordinated gang. The man at the front, the ganger, would use his pickaxe to break up the heavy soil. The men behind him would swiftly shovel the loose earth into a seemingly endless procession of wheelbarrows, which were then wheeled up steep wooden planks by other men to be dumped, forming small mountains of clay that lined the streets. The work was relentless, repetitive, and incredibly dangerous, but it was done with a rhythm and efficiency that no machine of the age could match. To power this incredible physical output, a navvy needed fuel. A working navvy's diet was the stuff of legend. He might consume over 5,000 calories a day, starting with a breakfast of steak and beer. Lunch would be enormous slabs of bread and cheese, and dinner more meat, potatoes, and several more pints of beer. It was the original high-protein, high-carbohydrate performance diet, just with a lot more ale. It had to be. These men were human earth-moving machines, and their delicate work might involve shifting 16 tons of soil in a single shift. You stand and watch, lulled by the steady rhythm of their work. The pick strikes the ground, the shovels scrape and lift, the barrows rumble and tip. It's a powerful human pulse driving the first stage of the city's recovery. These were the unsung, unseen heroes of the story. While Bazalgette was the brain, they were the muscle. While parliamentarians debated in their stuffy chambers, the navvies toiled in the deep, damp trenches. They were the ones who would face the real, physical dangers of the project. The ones who would turn Bazalgette's elegant lines on a map into a tangible, subterranean reality, one shovelful of London clay at a time. The great dig had begun. The army of navvies was assembled, their pickaxes and shovels ready, but their task was infinitely more complex than just digging a long, straight ditch. They were not working in an open field. They were about to perform major surgery on a living patient, without the benefit of anesthesia. Their challenge was to thread massive, city-sized arteries through the body of London without killing it, burrowing deep beneath a metropolis that would not, and could not, stop for them. Let's descend from the bright, noisy street into the half-finished world of the tunnels. You leave the summer heat behind and enter a cool, damp and dimly lit cavern. The air is thick with the smell of wet clay and the faint, hazy smoke from gas lamps that cast long, dancing shadows. You are in a section being built by the cut-and-cover method. Here, the navvies have dug a vast trench, 20, maybe 30 feet deep, straight down from the street level. The sides of this chasm are held back by a forest of thick timber beams, a temporary wooden skeleton to stop thousands of tons of earth from collapsing inwards. Down at the bottom, another team of men is carefully laying the foundations for the great brick sewer. Above you, you cower and hear the muffled, rumbling thunder of horse-drawn carriages and omnibuses, a constant reminder of the world you've left behind. We complain today when roadwork closes a lane for a week. Imagine entire thoroughfares like the Strand or Victoria Street being turned into vast, open-air canyons for months on end. But this method was only possible for the shallower sections. Much of the work had to be done through deep-level tunnelling, a far more perilous and claustrophobic endeavour. You venture now into one of these tunnels being bored deep beneath the city. The space is tight, the air is close. A small team of miners, often men with experience in the coal mines of Wales or the tin mines of Cornwall, work at the tunnel face. They lie on their sides, chipping away at the earth with small pickaxes in the flickering, uncertain light. The soil is loaded into small carts and hauled back to a vertical shaft where it is winched up to the surface. It's slow, painstaking, and incredibly dangerous work. The ground beneath London is not a uniform block of clay. It's a messy, unpredictable layer cake of history. One minute you're digging through soft gravel, the next your pickaxe clangs against the impossibly hard foundations of a Roman wall. The city's underground was a lasagna of horrors. The tunnellers might break through into a forgotten medieval cesspit, releasing the ghosts of smells past. Or, in the most gruesome scenario, they might find themselves digging through the soft, yielding earth of an ancient plague pit, a mass grave from a long-ago epidemic. These discoveries required delicate negotiations and often a hefty payment to the church or landowner whose consecrated ground you had just accidentally invaded. Engineering historians debate which aspect of the tunnelling was the greater challenge, the purely physical difficulty of excavating varied and unstable soil, or the logistical nightmare of coordinating thousands of workers and material deliveries in the middle of a congested, chaotic city. There were the existing, crumbling sewer pipes to navigate, which could burst and flood the tunnels with foul water. There were the newly laid gas mains, which, if ruptured, could fill the tunnel with explosive gas. And then there was the new kid on the block, the London Underground. In some places, Bazalgette's new sewers had to be threaded with surgical precision between the foundations of buildings and the brand new tunnels of the Metropolitan Railway, with just a few feet to spare. You can feel the immense weight of the city above you. The timber shoring groans and creaks, a constant living sound that reminds you of the pressure it is under. A sudden collapse was a constant fear. This was the slow, perilous, inch-by-inch advance of progress. It was a dark, damp and dangerous job, performed by men who understood the earth. And behind them, in the space they so carefully carved out, came another team of artisans, ready to turn these raw tunnels of mud and wood into enduring works of art. The navvies have done their brutal, earth-moving work, leaving behind a raw, dark wound in the London clay. But a tunnel of mud is not a sewer. Now, a new kind of army descends into the depths, an army of artisans. These are the bricklayers, and their job is to transform these rough-hewn caverns into enduring, subterranean cathedrals. It might seem strange to use a word like cathedral for a sewer, but as you watch them work, you begin to understand. You are standing in a newly excavated section of tunnel. The air is still damp, the walls are dark soil held back by the groaning timber frame. At one end, this raw earth gives way to a perfect, sweeping curve of reddish-brown brick. Here, the bricklayers are at work, and the transformation is mesmerizing. This is not the rough, slapdash construction you might imagine for something that will never be seen. This is a work of industrial art. The bricks themselves are special. Bazalgette insisted on the highest possible quality. Each brick was inspected, and any that were not perfectly formed were rejected. They had to be hard, dense, and non-porous, able to withstand constant dampness and immense pressure for centuries. Over 318 million of these perfect bricks would be needed to complete the project. That's enough to build a small city, all of it destined to be hidden deep underground. The quality control for these humble bricks was arguably more rigorous than that applied to some of the very politicians who'd commissioned the work. But the real revolution was the mortar, the grey paste that held the bricks together. For centuries, builders had used lime mortar, which sets by reacting with carbon dioxide in the air. This would be useless in a damp, sealed tunnel. Bazalgette, however, used a relatively new invention, Portland cement. Named for its resemblance to the pale grey stone quarried on the Isle of Portland, this cement had a remarkable property. It was hydraulic. It could set and harden even when completely submerged in water. It was the secret ingredient that made the whole project possible, the chemical magic that would bind these millions of bricks into a single monolithic structure. You watch a bricklayer at his trade. He works with a quiet, focused efficiency. With a flick of his wrist, he spreads a perfect layer of the wet grey mortar. He takes a brick, feels its weight, and with a few precise taps of his trowel handle, sets it perfectly in place. Tap, tap, tap. The sound is soft, rhythmic, and deeply satisfying. He doesn't have the brute strength of the Navy, but he has a craftsman's precision. Layer by layer, course by course, the beautiful ovoid shape of the sewer takes form. The walls are several layers thick, an intricate, interlocking pattern of bricks designed to distribute the immense pressure from the earth around them. Architectural historians debate whether this beautiful, high-quality brickwork was a purely functional decision by Bazalgette to ensure longevity, or if it was also an expression of Victorian pride, a belief in imbuing even the most utilitarian industrial projects with a sense of grandeur and artistry. Working by the dim, flickering light of a candle or a gas lamp, these bricklayers took immense pride in their work. They were creating masterpieces for an audience of rats and sewage, the greatest artists that no one would ever see. In sections, the finished work is so flawless, the curves so perfect that they are known as gallery work. You run your hand along a finished section of the tunnel wall. It's cool, solid, and perfectly smooth. It feels eternal. It is a monument to quiet competence and a testament to the idea that something does not need to be seen to be beautiful. In these dark, hidden tunnels, an army of anonymous craftsmen were creating the beautiful, enduring bones of a new, cleaner London. The beautiful, hidden brick tunnels now stretch for miles beneath London, silent and dark, ready for service. For the higher parts of the city, north and south of the river, gravity alone was enough to carry the wares to eastward, away from the population. But much of London lies low, in some places even below the high tide mark. For these areas, gravity needed a helping hand. It needed a lift. Bazalgette's system required a mechanical heart, something to give the sewage one final powerful shove on its journey to the sea. This heart took the form of the great pumping stations, and the Victorians did not build a simple functional pump house. That was not their style. They built palaces. Let's emerge from the dark tunnels and visit the most magnificent of them all, a building so grand and so unexpected, it has been nicknamed the Cathedral of Sewage. This is the Abbey Mills pumping station. From the outside, it looks not like a piece of industrial infrastructure, but like a Byzantine church transplanted to the marshlands of East London. It has a central, octagonal dome, ornate towers, and row upon row of arched windows. The brickwork is a tapestry of different colours. If you didn't know its purpose, you might expect to hear an organ playing, not the hum of machinery. It seems the Victorians believed that if you were going to build a house for pumping sewage, you might as well make it glorious. You step inside, and the sheer scale and beauty are breathtaking. The main engine house is a vast, echoing space flooded with light from the high windows, but instead of pews and an altar, you see machines. 4 colossal steam engines, their massive iron beams rising and falling with a slow, hypnotic, and immensely powerful rhythm. Each beam weighs over 26 tons, yet they move with a quiet, dignified grace. The air is warm and smells of hot oil and steam. The sound is a deep, steady, rhythmic hum, the thrumming heartbeat of the entire sewer system. It's a surprisingly soothing sound, the sound of immense power under perfect control. Then you notice the details. This is not a bare industrial space, it is lavishly decorated. The great cast-iron columns that support the roof are not simple pillars. They are adorned with intricate floral patterns. The railings are delicate wrought iron. The brass fittings on the engines are polished to a mirror shine. Historians debate the motivation for such opulent design. Was it Bazalgette expressing civic pride and a desire to ennoble public works, or a clever political move to make the massive expenditure palatable by creating beautiful landmark buildings? Whatever the reason, the effect is stunning. It's the only cathedral in the world where you might pray for everything to keep moving smoothly. The function of this magnificent place was simple. The low-level sewers, having travelled as far as they could by gravity, ended here. The sewage collected in a deep well beneath the station. Then, these mighty steam engines would power the pumps, lifting the millions of gallons of waste vertically by about 40 feet, up into the main northern outfall sewer. This final sewer, a massive brick aqueduct running high above the marshes, would then let gravity take over again for the final leg of the journey. The waste was carried several more miles east to a place called Beckton, where it would finally be discharged, on the ebb tide, into the River Thames, far, far away from the sensitive noses of the London populace, and crucially, the members of Parliament. You stand there, in this palace of pipes, listening to the gentle hiss of steam and the powerful, rhythmic sigh of the great beam engines. It is the triumphant meeting point of all the work that has come before. The sweat of the navvies, the artistry of the bricklayers, and the genius of Bazalgette's plan all culminate here, in this beautiful, powerful building that would finally give London the clean flush it so desperately needed. For years, London has been a city of chaotic construction. Its streets have been ripped open, its air filled with the noise of industry and the sweat of the navvies. The great brick tunnels lie waiting, silent and expectant, beneath the city. The magnificent pumping stations, those cathedrals of steam and iron, have been polished and prepared. Now, after all the digging, all the building, and all the spending, the moment of truth has arrived. It is time to turn the key. It is time for the first clean flush. The system was opened in phases, but let's imagine ourselves at one of the main opening ceremonies in April of 1865. The guest of honour is none other than the Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII. It is quite possibly the least glamorous royal duty in history to officially declare a sewer open for business. But the sense of occasion is immense. A crowd of dignitaries has gathered, politicians, engineers, members of the Metropolitan Board of Works, and, at the centre of it all, a proud and profoundly vindicated Joseph Bazalgette. In a show of supreme confidence, a celebratory banquet had even been held for the project's backers deep inside one of the main southern sewers before it became operational. It's surely the only formal dinner party in history where the guests were thankful that the main service had not yet begun. Now, the ceremony begins. There are speeches, of course. Dignitaries praise the marvels of modern engineering, the wisdom of the government, and the dawning of a new hygienic age. But the words are just a prelude. The real event is a simple, mechanical action. The Prince of Wales is invited to turn a large cast-iron wheel. With a bit of effort, the wheel begins to move, its grinding sound echoing in the cavernous building. It is opening the first main sluice gate. Deep underground, a vast iron door is slowly rising. For the first time, the intercepted flow from one of London's old, filthy sewers is diverted away from the Thames and into Bazalgette's new, clean, brick-lined superhighway. There is a low rumble, which grows into a deep-throated roar. You can hear the first great wave of the city's waste thundering into the interceptor tunnel, beginning its long gravity-powered journey eastward. The system is alive. The great engines at Abbey Mills and Crossness hiss into action, their mighty beams beginning their slow, powerful dance, ready to provide the lift needed to send the flow on its final leg to the outfalls far downstream. The heart has started to beat. What was the effect on the city? Historians debate the immediate public reaction. Was there a city-wide celebration, or was the change so gradual that for many, the relief was muted? The truth is, there was no single dramatic moment for the average person, but if you were to walk along the banks of the Thames in central London in the weeks and months that followed, you would notice a quiet, miraculous change. The old sewer outlets, the ones that constantly vomited their foul contents onto the mudflats, were now silent. They were, blessedly, unemployed. The thick, opaque, soupy quality of the water began to thin. The overwhelming, suffocating stench, the very stink that had brought the city to its knees, began to lift. It didn't vanish overnight, but its power was broken. You could once again smell the river, not just the city's waste. For the first time in a generation, a walk along the river didn't require a scented handkerchief. The water, while still far from pristine, no longer looked and smelled like a fermenting vat of poison. The change was slow, subtle, but profound. Bazalgette's great machine was working. It was silently, invisibly, tirelessly doing its job, draining the filth away from the heart of the city. The great stink was over. London could breathe again. And with the taming of the river, the way was now clear for a project that would transform not just the health of the city, but its very face. The great machine was running. Deep underground, millions of gallons of waste were being silently whisked away from the city's heart. The air in central London was breathable again, and the river, while not pristine, was no longer an open sewer. With the immediate crisis over, Joseph Bazalgette turned his attention to the second phase of his master plan, a phase that would not be hidden underground, but would rise up in plain sight, transforming the very shape and character of London forever. This was the birth of the Thames embankment. For centuries, the edge of the River Thames was not a clean, hard line. It was a messy, chaotic, and often foul-smelling zone of muddy flats, rickety wooden jetties, and ramshackle buildings. It was the world of the mudlark and the docker, a place of work and grime, not of leisure. Bazalgette saw an opportunity for a brilliant piece of civic multitasking. His main intercepting sewer, the low-level sewer on the north bank, needed to run right along the river's edge. So, he reasoned, why not build a grand new river wall and place the sewer right inside it? It was the ultimate two-for-one deal. Come for the revolutionary sewer system, stay for the lovely riverside walk. And so, a new kind of construction begins. You are standing on Westminster Bridge, looking down at a scene of immense, organised activity. Instead of digging down, they are building out. Massive cofferdams are constructed in the river, and the water is pumped out, creating a dry working space on the riverbed. Here, the navvies and stonemasons begin to build the great retaining wall. It's not made of brick, but of massive, immaculately carved blocks of granite, designed to withstand the ceaseless push of the river's tide. Behind this wall, the great brick sewer is constructed, a hidden artery within the new stone embankment. Then, the space between. The sewer and the old riverbank is filled in with millions of tons of earth and gravel. London is literally making itself bigger, reclaiming over 30 acres of land from the muddy river. Urban planners and historians still debate the primary legacy of the embankment. Was it a feat of public health engineering, a crucial transport corridor, or a work of social engineering that displaced the riverbank's poor communities and created a grand promenade for the middle and upper classes? In truth, it was all three. Tucked neatly inside this vast structure, alongside the sewer, was a new tunnel for the city's latest marvel, the Underground Railway. And on top, a wide, smooth road was paved and a grand public walkway was created. It was the world's most over-engineered flowerbed. You watch as the finishing touches are put in place. Hundreds of young plane trees are planted, the same trees whose descendants shade the embankment today. Ornate cast-iron benches are installed, their armrests fantastically shaped like sphinxes or camels. And then there are the lamps. Designed by Bazalgette's own architect, George Vulliamy, the new gas lampposts are works of art. Their bases are formed by the intertwined tails of two dolphins, their scaly bodies curving gracefully upwards to support the light. This was not just infrastructure, it was a declaration of civic pride. As the years pass and the project is completed, you can take a stroll along the new Victoria embankment. The air is clean, To your right are the beautiful new public gardens. To your left is a tamed and orderly river. The road is busy with carriages, and the walkway is filled with Londoners of all classes, enjoying a space that simply did not exist a decade earlier. It is a profound transformation. The stinking, chaotic, disease-ridden shoreline has been replaced by a sweeping, elegant curve of granite and trees. It is the ultimate symbol of the new London, orderly, clean, and confident. The filth had not just been hidden, it had been buried under a foundation of progress and spectacular beauty, and white. Such a beautiful new public space to enjoy, it was easier than ever for Londoners to adopt an out-of-sight, out-of-mind mentality about where their waste was now going. A beautiful new embankment lines the river. Deep underground, the great interceptors are whisking the city's filth away. In central London, the Great Stink is a fading, traumatic memory. The system worked. The problem was solved. It is a comforting, happy thought to drift off to. But the solution was not a magical act of purification. The waste had not vanished. It had simply been moved. And downstream, far to the east of the city's gleaming new promenades, the relocated problem was about to create a tragedy of its own. Let's journey forward in time a little, to the evening of September the 3rd, 1878. You are on the deck of the Princess Alice, a brightly painted paddle steamer making its final run of the day. It's been a lovely day out. Hundreds of Londoners, families and sweethearts took the boat downriver to a pleasure garden for a day of sun and sea air, a brief escape from the grit of the city. Now, as twilight gathers, a cheerful band is playing on the deck. The mood is happy and relaxed. The steamer is crowded with over 700 passengers, far more than it should have been carrying. As the Princess Alice churns its way upriver through a stretch of water called Galleon's Reach, you notice the water here is different from the river in central London. It's darker, almost black, and the air carries a familiar, unpleasant, septic smell. You are passing the great outfalls. Just an hour ago, at high tide, the sluice gates at both the Beckton and Crossness pumping stations were opened, releasing a combined 75 million gallons of London's raw, untreated sewage into the river. The boat is sailing through a toxic soup. Suddenly, there are shouts of alarm. Looming out of the dusk is the Bywell Castle, a huge, sturdy, iron-hulled collier, a ship designed for carrying coal, steaming downriver. In a moment of confusion and misjudgment, the two vessels turn towards each other. The collision is brutally swift. The iron bow of the heavy collier slices into the side of the lightweight pleasure boat like a knife through cake. The Princess Alice heels over, splits in two, and sinks in less than 4 minutes. The happy scene of a moment ago becomes one of terror and chaos. But the true horror was not the sinking itself, it was what the passengers fell into. This was not water. Survivors would later describe it as a semi-solid, a black and stinking mass that choked the throat and blinded the eyes. The recently discharged sewage was so thick and so devoid of oxygen that many of the victims did not simply drown. They were poisoned and suffocated by the very waste that central London had so efficiently exported. The river that day was a chemical weapon. Historians and maritime experts still debate the primary cause of the high death toll. Was it the speed of the sinking and the panic, or was the toxic nature of the water the decisive factor that turned a tragic accident into a catastrophe? Over 650 people lost their lives that evening, making it the worst inland waterway disaster in British history. Rescuers pulled people from the water only to watch them die on the riverbank, their lungs seared by the chemical fumes. The irony was devastating. The system designed to save Londoners from disease had created a deadly trap for them miles away. The Princess Alice disaster was a grim and terrible postscript to the story of the Great Stink. It was a reminder that you cannot simply move a problem and expect it to disappear. The triumph of the embankment and the clean central river had created a dangerous illusion of safety. The waste was out of sight and out of mind, but its power to kill remained. The tragedy would spark a new public outcry and lead to the next chapter in the story of London's sanitation. The realization that the sewage needed not just to be moved, but to be treated. The tragedy of the Princess Alice was a dark stain on the new system, a reminder of its imperfections. But while this unforeseen disaster unfolded downstream, back in the heart of London, an equally profound, though much quieter, revolution was taking place. Bazalgette's sewers were having an enormous, unintended, and history-altering side effect. They were accidentally proving Dr. John Snow right. They were killing the Miasma Theory. Let's return to the world of ideas. Remember the central, terrifying belief that governed the age, that disease, especially cholera, was carried on the wind, a poisonous vapour rising from filth. The Great Stink was seen as the ultimate proof of this, a killer miasma enveloping the city. The sewers were built as a direct response to this fear, an attempt to get rid of the smell by getting rid of the filth that produced it. The politicians who signed the bill and the public who paid for it believed they were sanitizing the air, but what they were actually doing, without fully realizing it, was cleaning the water. As the new sewers began to capture the city's waste, the cesspits that had for centuries leaked their contents into the ground were finally being sealed up for good. This meant that the wells and public pumps from which Londoners drew their drinking water were no longer being constantly contaminated by human effluent. The Thames itself, the source of water for several large water companies, was now significantly cleaner upstream of the sewer outfalls. The result, the chain of infection for waterborne diseases like cholera and typhoid, was being systematically broken. In the summer of 1866, a cholera epidemic once again struck Europe and arrived in London. The old guard of miasma-believing doctors held their breath, expecting a repeat of the devastating plagues of the past. But a full-blown catastrophe never happened. The outbreak was almost entirely confined to a specific area of East London. When investigators rushed to the scene, they discovered that this one neighbourhood was the only part of the city whose water was supplied by a company that had not yet connected to the new, cleaner water sources. It was still drawing water from a contaminated part of the river. It was a perfect, tragic, real-world experiment. It was Dr. Snow's Broad Street pump investigation, but on a massive scale. This was the final, undeniable proof. The disease didn't spread on the air, it followed the water mains. You could practically trace it on a map, just as Snow had done more than a decade earlier. The government had, in one of history's greatest ironies, stumbled upon the cure for cholera while running away from a bad smell. They had followed the wrong theory to the right solution. Medical historians still debate the true death of miasma theory, as it lingered like a stubborn ghost in public consciousness and some medical circles for decades. Old ideas die hard, and many doctors clung to their belief in bad air like a tattered security blanket. But the evidence was becoming overwhelming. In France and Germany, scientists like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch were now using powerful microscopes to see the invisible world that Snow had only been able to deduce. They isolated the specific microbes that caused diseases, identifying the tiny, comma-shaped bacterium, Vibrio cholerae, as the true culprit of cholera. The age of miasma was over, the age of germ theory had begun, and with it the entire foundation of modern public health was born: John Snow. W., who had died in 1858, the very year of the Great Stink, never lived to see his work so completely vindicated. He never had the chance to say, "I told you so." But the clean bills of health in London, the absence of the cholera death carts during hot summers, were a more powerful tribute than any medal or monument. His quiet, lonely crusade, once dismissed as the strange obsession of a London doctor, had become the accepted truth, proven by the very bricks and mortar of the great sewer system itself. Dr. Snow received his vindication from beyond the grave, his theories proven right by the very system built to satisfy his rivals. But what of the man who actually built that system? What became of the quiet, methodical engineer who drew the plans, fought the politicians, and commanded the army of navvies? What does a man do for an encore after he has saved the world's greatest city from drowning in its own filth? For Joseph Bazalgette, the answer was simple: you keep working. The completion of the main drainage system was not the end of his career, it was merely the most famous part of it. He remained the chief engineer of the Metropolitan Board of Works for another quarter of a century, and his quiet, competent hand shaped the face of modern London in ways that are still visible everywhere. After he built the Victoria Embankment, he went on to build the Albert and Chelsea embankments, lining the river with miles of elegant granite-walled promenades. He laid out new, grand thoroughfares like Northumberland Avenue and Charing Cross Road, cutting through the old cramped city to create light and space. He designed beautiful new bridges to span the Thames, including the elegant suspension bridge at Hammersmith. He was, in many ways, the master builder of Victorian London. And yet, no matter how many beautiful bridges or grand avenues he created, he would always be remembered, first and foremost, as the sewer guy. Biographers debate the nature of Bazalgette's public profile. Was his relative lack of celebrity a result of his own modest, unassuming personality, or did the Victorian public simply find it difficult to lionize an engineer of sewers, a profession that lacked the glamour of a military hero or a great politician? He wasn't a showman. He didn't seek the limelight. He was a public servant in the truest sense, a man who saw a problem and dedicated his life to fixing it with quiet, relentless diligence. His idea of a thrilling afternoon was most likely reviewing drainage gradients for a new public park. For his troubles, he did receive official recognition. In 1875, he was summoned to Windsor Castle and knighted by the Queen. He was now Sir Joseph Bazalgette, a title that certainly sounded respectable, though perhaps less fitting than Lord of the Underworld or King of the Flush. He served as the president of the Institution of Civil Engineers and was admired and respected by his peers, but he never became a household name in the way that a great general or a famous artist might. His greatest triumphs were buried underground, invisible. His monument was a city that simply worked, a city that no longer stank, a city where cholera no longer reaped its grim harvest every summer. He retired in 1889 and lived out his final years at his home in Wimbledon. There are stories, perhaps legendary, that speak to his lifelong obsession with his great work. One such tale recounts that as he lay on his deathbed in 1891, he was offered some food or drink, and his final mumbled words were, "The sewage of London." It's probably not true, but the fact that the story is told at all reveals the truth of his legacy. He was the man who took on the city's greatest, foulest problem and solved it so completely that future generations would be able to take for granted the simple act of flushing a toilet without a second thought. His legacy wasn't a statue or a grand tomb. It was the silent, efficient, and enduring network of tunnels deep beneath the streets. He was the invisible hero who cleaned the invisible world, ensuring the health and prosperity of millions of people who would never even know his name, but who would benefit from his quiet genius every single day. Sir Joseph Bazalgette, the quiet engineer, rests in his grave. The Victorian era, with its confidence and its coal smoke, fades into the sepia tones of history. But the great work he accomplished, the vast, hidden network of tunnels, did not fade with him. It endured. It is one thing to build a system that solves a crisis in your own time. It is another thing entirely to build something that continues to work, silently and efficiently, for over 150 years. Let's drift forward through time, to the London of today, and see how the Victorian skeleton of the city is holding up. Imagine you are with a modern-day maintenance crew. You descend through a manhole on a busy London street, leaving the world of smartphones, electric cars and bustling tourists behind. You climb down a modern metal ladder, and when you reach the bottom and switch on your powerful flashlight, you are standing in a space that is simultaneously in the 21st century and the 1860s. You are inside one of Bazalgette's main intercepting sewers. The first thing that strikes you is the quality. The Victorian brickwork, the cathedral from our earlier journey, is largely intact. The sweeping, ovoid curves are just as the original bricklayers left them. The bricks themselves are hard and solid, bearing their immense load with a quiet dignity. You run your hand over the wall and feel the same cool, smooth surface that a proud craftsman felt a century and a half ago. It's perhaps the best built thing in London, and it's the one part most people would never want to see. This subterranean network has the best warranty in history. The sewer is, of course, no longer just a Victorian artefact. It is a living, working part of modern London. Along the walls, you can see the signs of the future running alongside the past. Thick fibre-optic cables carrying the city's internet traffic are neatly bracketed to the brickwork. Modern monitoring sensors gleam in the beam of your light, tasting the air and water quality. The very system that was once debated with handwritten letters and celebrated with steam power now helps to carry the data of the digital age. It has seen the world change from one of horse-drawn carriages to one of space travel, all from its dark, silent vantage point. The flow of water is much greater now. Bazalgette designed his system for a city of 4 million people. Today, the population of the area it serves is more than double that. This brings us to the Bazalgette paradox, a concept modern engineers debate. Was the system so well built and so forward-thinking that it worked for too long? Its very success may have encouraged a century of complacency, a delay in investing in the next generation of infrastructure needed to cope with a population explosion its designer could never have fully predicted. The grand old system still works, but it is under immense strain. The modern flushers, the teams who maintain these tunnels, are the direct descendants of their Victorian counterparts. They still inspect the brickwork and clear the occasional blockage, though their tools are more advanced. And they still sometimes find history washed into the tunnels. Victorian coins, clay pipes, old bottles, and sometimes even stranger things, like munitions from the Second World War, are discovered in the sediment, a quiet archive of the city's life passing by overhead. For over 150 years, this Victorian masterpiece has been the silent, beating heart of London's public health. It is a hidden legacy of a time when the city, faced with an existential crisis, chose not a cheap, short-term patch, but a bold, brilliant and enduring solution. But as the 21st century wears on, and the demands on this old system grow ever greater, a new kind of monster has begun to form in these venerable Victorian arteries, a monster born of modern habits meeting 19th century tunnels. You are still deep beneath modern London, standing in the enduring brick tunnel that Bazalgette built. This Victorian marvel has withstood the test of time, but it is now facing an enemy its designer could never have conceived of. The maintenance crew you are with has stopped. Up ahead, the steady, gurgling flow of the sewer is constricted, backing up. The beam of a powerful flashlight cuts through the gloom and lands on the cause. It is a pale, greasy, solid mass, clinging to the walls of the tunnel like a monstrous subterranean iceberg. This is the new menace of the sewers. This is a fatberg. It is a uniquely modern monster, a direct consequence of 21st century life meeting a 19th century drainage system. It begins with the things we pour down our sinks: cooking oil, bacon grease, leftover butter. In the warm, moving water of a kitchen sink, it's all liquid. But as it travels into the cold, dark sewer, it cools and solidifies, clinging to the rough brick surface. This sticky layer of fat then becomes a trap. And what does it trap? The thousands of things we flush down our toilets that have no business being there. Chief among the culprits are wet wipes. Unlike toilet paper, they don't break down in water. They are woven with plastic fibres, making them strong and durable. So they swirl down into the sewer, and when they encounter a sticky patch of grease, they get stuck. Then another joins it, and another. They are joined by cotton swabs, dental floss, sanitary products, and discarded plaster. ICS. Slowly, painstakingly, this gruesome, greasy coral reef begins to grow, layer by layer. It is a geological formation of our own convenience culture. You move closer. The smell is astounding, and not like the sewage you've become accustomed to. It's a rancid, cheesy, overwhelmingly foul odour, like rotten food mixed with industrial chemicals. The surface of the fatberg is a pale, waxy, almost rock-like crust, and embedded within it you can see the evidence of the city above. It's like an archaeological dig of our daily habits. You see the unmistakable patterns of different brands of wet wipes, the blue plastic sticks of cotton buds, all cemented together in a solid matrix of congealed fat. These things can grow to an immense size. In 2017, the famous Whitechapel Fatberg was discovered. It was over 250 metres long and weighed 130 tonnes, heavier than a blue whale. It took a team of workers weeks of painstaking, dangerous effort to break it up with high-pressure water jets and shovels. A small, carefully preserved piece of it was even put on display in the Museum of London, surely one of the most disgusting and thought-provoking museum exhibits of all time. Sanitation experts and environmental psychologists debate the most effective way to combat fatbergs. Is it through public information campaigns, legislation for restaurants, or new technology? For now, the solution is brutal, manual labour. You watch as the crew, dressed in protective gear, attacks the mass with high-pressure hoses, blasting it apart piece by piece. It's a slow, foul, and difficult process. This is the modern challenge for Bazalgette's system. He built his sewers to handle human waste and rainwater. He did not and could not have designed them to handle solid blocks of grease and plastic. The smooth ovoid shape of his tunnels, so brilliant at flushing away the waste of his own time, provides a perfect surface for these modern monsters to gain a foothold. The great Victorian skeleton is still strong, but it is beginning to suffer from a hardening of the arteries, a condition brought on entirely by the habits of the generations it was built to serve. We have travelled from the stinking riverbanks of 1858 to the fatberg-clogged arteries of the present day. We have met the ignored scientist, the unassuming engineer, the panicked politicians, and the unseen workers. But the story of the Great Stink is more than just a tale of a foul summer and a brilliant solution. Its true legacy is not made of brick or iron. It is an idea. It is the story of a fundamental shift in how we think about cities, about government, and about our right to a healthy life. Before 1858, the state of your immediate environment was largely your own problem. If the street outside your door was filthy, if the water from your local pump was suspect, that was a private misfortune. The government might concern itself with wars, trade, and the punishment of criminals, but the hidden world of sanitation and public health was not seen as its core responsibility. The Great Stink changed that forever. It was a crisis so total, so democratic in its misery, that it forced the state to accept a new, profound duty of care. The result was a new, unspoken social contract. You can feel its effects every single day. When you turn on a tap and clear, clean water comes out, you are enjoying the legacy of the Great Stink. When you flush a toilet and the waste simply disappears without a second thought, you are living inside the world that Bazalgette built and the Great Stink made necessary. The greatest legacy of this entire story is that we are now able to completely forget about it. The system's success is defined by its invisibility. This event was the bloody, filthy birth of modern urban planning. It entrenched the sanitary idea, a movement that had been championed by reformers for years. They argued that it was better, cheaper, and more humane to prevent disease by engineering a clean environment than it was to simply build more hospitals to treat the sick. The Great Stink proved them right on a spectacular scale. It demonstrated that a massive, state-funded preventative public health project was not an expensive luxury, but an essential investment for a functioning society. This model of using engineering to solve social problems would be copied in cities all around the world. Urban theorists, looking back, sometimes debate whether this legacy is entirely positive. Did it also create a reliance on massive, centralized techno-fixes? Did it encourage the out-of-sight, out-of-mind thinking that allows us to create new problems like the fatbergs by insulating us from the consequences of our own waste? Perhaps. But it's hard to argue with the fundamental goodness of the outcome. A moment of profound political embarrassment and panic became a blueprint for responsible, long-term governance. So when you think of the Great Stink, don't just think of the smell. Think of it as the moment that cities began to make a promise to their inhabitants, a promise of clean water, a promise of sanitation, a promise that the government is responsible not just for the visible world of streets and parks, but for the invisible world of pipes and drains that keep us all alive. It was the moment that humanity, crowded together in a great and growing metropolis, decided it had to take collective responsibility for its own survival. And it all happened because for one hot summer, the smell became so bad that doing nothing was no longer an option. We have explored the ideas and the legacy, but for our last moment, tie us together on this journey, let's return to the river itself. Not the river of 1858, but the river of today. Imagine you are taking a slow, quiet walk along the Victoria Embankment as evening begins to settle over London. The air is cool and clean, carrying only the faintest hint of river water and city life. The sun is low in the sky, casting a warm, golden light across the water and turning the great buildings of the skyline into dark, noble silhouettes. You lean against the thick granite wall, the same wall we watched being built, and rest your hands on its cool, solid surface. Below you, the River Thames laps gently against the stone. The water is dark and mysterious, but it moves with a placid, predictable rhythm. It is just a river again. No longer a monster, no longer a chemical soup, just a quiet, tidal waterway making its patient journey to the sea. The contrast with the scene from our story is almost impossible to comprehend. Right here, where you now stand on solid pavement, there was once only stinking, treacherous mud. You try to picture it, you try to imagine this serene promenade replaced by the chaotic, foul-smelling shore we visited earlier. Instead of tourists with cameras, you picture the small, ragged figures of the mudlarks, their hands sifting through the filth for a scrap of coal. Instead of the gentle rustle of leaves from the great plane trees beside you, you try to hear the groans of the dying river and the desperate shouts of the politicians in the nearby Houses of Parliament. The peace you feel now is a peace that was earned, built directly on top of that past chaos. You begin to walk, your footsteps quiet on the pavement. The ornate dolphin lampposts, the ones designed by Bazalgette, are beginning to glow. Their soft, warm light illuminates the path ahead and reflects gently on the water's surface. These beautiful objects, which now seem so timeless and essential to the London scenery, were once a radical final touch on a vast public health project. They were the decorative flourish on a lifeline. You pass one of the famous benches with its sphinx-shaped armrests, and you can almost imagine Joseph Bazalgette himself sitting here for a moment, a quiet, elderly man looking out at the river he tamed, the city he saved. Further along, you come to Cleopatra's Needle, the ancient Egyptian obelisk that stands guard by the water's edge. It has stood here since 1878, a silent stone witness. It saw the last of the river's great filth. It watched the pleasure steamer Princess Alice depart on its final, tragic voyage. It has watched as the river slowly healed, as the city grew ever larger, and as new challenges like the fatbergs began to form deep in the tunnels beneath its foundations. As you look at the peaceful water, you might wonder if any city truly solves its problems, or just transforms them into new ones for future generations to face. But for now, there is only peace. The distant hum of traffic is a soothing, constant sound. The great trees, once tiny saplings planted in reclaimed mud, are now majestic giants. their leaves whispering in the evening breeze. This, right here, is the ultimate legacy of the Great Stink, a moment of pure, simple, urban serenity. A beautiful public space where once there was only a disease-ridden wasteland. It's a quiet triumph, a victory so complete that all evidence of the original battle has been erased, leaving only a deep and profound calm. Your peaceful walk is over. You turn away from the quiet river and the soft lights of the embankment and begin to head for home, for your own quiet room, your own comfortable bed. The story of the Great Stink, with its foul smells and forgotten heroes, begins to settle into a gentle memory. But as you walk, you might find yourself thinking not about what you can see, but about what you can't. Beneath your feet, beneath the pavement of this city, or any city, lies a hidden world, a silent, dark network of pipes, tunnels, and cables that is the true foundation of our modern lives. We take this unseen world completely for granted. We expect the lights to turn on, the water to be clean, the waste to simply vanish. This vast, intricate system is the quiet guardian of our health and comfort, a legacy of the very crisis we have just explored. The Great Stink was the moment we were forced to acknowledge the underworld we had created, and in doing so, we learned to manage it, to engineer it, and finally, to trust it so completely that we could forget it even exists. Every city is now built upon its own version of Bazalgette's masterpiece, a circulatory system that keeps the metropolis alive. Think for a moment of the walls of your own home. Hidden within them is a quiet universe of wires and pipes, a miniature reflection of the great systems buried beneath the streets. They are all there, waiting patiently to serve you, the result of 2 centuries of planning, of trial and error, of lessons learned from moments like the Great Stink, and from the quiet dedication of countless engineers, planners and labourers whose names we will never know. Their work allows us the simple, profound luxury of not having to think about where our water comes from or where our waste goes. Their gift to us is peace of mind. And so, our long journey through the filth and the chaos, the panic and the fears, the progress, comes to a gentle close. We have walked the foul riverbanks and the grand new promenades. We have seen a city brought to its knees by a smell and then raised back up by the quiet competence of a man with a plan. We have honoured the forgotten scientist who saw the truth in the water, and the anonymous workers who shaped the earth and laid the bricks in the dark. We have seen how a moment of profound crisis can give birth to a legacy of health, beauty and order. The story is over, and all that is left is the quiet and the calm that it created. Now it is time to let that story drift away. Let the images of Victorian London, the hazy sun, the dark river, the endless tunnels, let them all soften and fade into the background, like a watercolour painting left out in a gentle rain. Your journey is done and you are safe now, far from any stinking river, in the quiet comfort of your own room. Feel the softness of your pillow beneath your head, a gentle anchor in the stillness of the night. Notice the weight of your blanket, a reassuring presence, a quiet shield against the world outside. The only thing that matters now is the easy, gentle rhythm of your own breathing, a soft and steady tide, pulling you slowly and deeply towards rest. Let the last thoughts of the day dissolve. Let the darkness be a soft, warm blanket. There is nothing left to do now, nothing at all but to close your eyes and to sleep deeply, peacefully,